And just stick to the fundamentals, the basic principle. What's wrong with you? Hello everyone and welcome back to another video. In this video we're going to talk about, are discus fish really that hard to keep? And to give you a very short answer, no, they're not that hard to keep. In fact, out of all the fish I have kept over the years, discus is one of those fish that I have had the most success keeping. But that being said, there are a few things, if you do them wrong, they can be very challenging to keep. So please stick until the end of the video so I can provide you the details of what those things are. Okay, so now let's get into the details. If you're someone who understands the basics of keeping a fish tank, if you understand the nitrogen cycle, the filtration, the relationship between the amount of fish you're keeping and the water volume, having proper stocking levels, how much water changes you should be doing based on how many fish you have and the size of your tank. If you understand these things well and you're doing them right and you have been able to keep other kinds of fish alive and healthy and thriving in your tank, you can keep discus as well. Because the basics of keeping any kind of fish is almost the same. If you got the basics right, it's easy. But if you're still struggling with the basics of their understanding, how to implement them properly, then I think it's not the right time for you to keep discus. In my personal experience, I've noticed that discus is one of those fish that actually gives you way too many signs and warnings before that something is going wrong with them before they actually die. Based on the problem, they will show a change in their color, their behavior, their breathing pattern, their swimming behavior, and similar sort of things. And all these early signs and warnings actually give you time to intervene and do whatever is necessary to save them. Probably they're having internal worms or parasites or some other kind of problems. So these early signs give you a chance to be prepared and do whatever is necessary right away and cure them back to health. But if you still do end up losing a discus, it just hits hard and it's different than losing any other fish. And I'll explain you why. Now, I want you guys to understand this. For example, let's say you got 10 tetras, okay? And after 2 or 3 weeks, or let's say after 1 or 2 months, out of the 10, let's say 3, 4, or 5 died. Well, on your next visit to the store, you might get 5 or 6 more, and then maybe after a few months, you'll just totally forget that you even lost any tetras. Because they're so cheap. And because they're so cheap, and they're so readily available, you might not even put too much time in thinking that what actually went wrong with them. Was there something you could have done? You might just accept it as maybe this was their time. Now imagine the same thing with discus. Let's say you got 7 or 8 discus, with each discus costing anywhere from $60 to $100 or more, depending upon the quality and the size of the fish you're getting. Now when you buy such expensive fish, you will be so much invested to make sure that you keep the fish alive, healthy and thriving for as long as possible. But let's say you end up losing 3 or 4 discus. It's going to hit you hard. And you will also not be able to just brush off the reason why they died, just like any other fish that you can easily replace. Especially when you cannot figure out what was the reason they died. And to be honest, sometimes we just can't. Then out of all the pain and frustration and negativity caused by the death of the fish, especially when you cannot understand the reason of the death, you might eventually reach the conclusion that discus are very hard to keep. They're very sensitive fish. Especially when it's so widely believed that they are very sensitive fish and very hard to keep. But in my humble opinion, if you're doing the things right, they're not that hard to keep. They're not that sensitive also. But there is one thing I would like to mention, that before you go and start keeping discus, there's one thing you should do, and that is to learn about medication and common fish diseases and their treatment. Once again, many hobbyists, when they're keeping very cheap fish that are very, very easy to replace and they don't cost a lot as well, it is understandable that sometimes people just try to avoid the topic of medicines and the fish ailments and all these things, and just it's always easier to replace a fish when it dies than to treat the one you have. Especially in the case of keeping fish, it's not as straightforward as keeping as any other pet when it comes to disease and its cure. For example, if you have a cat or a dog and if it gets sick, you're going to take it to the vet. The vet is going to check the animal, they will advise you the medication and whatever you have to do. You bring the medication and you just do whatever is recommended by the vet. But in case of the fish, we are the ones who have to diagnose what's going wrong. We have to see the medications available in the market, and we have to see how we have to go about treating the fish. And for most people, it's not really that easy. So if you're going to keep discus, I really advise you to please study about some of the common ailments in fish in general or in discus and their treatments and the medication commonly used for them. Now there are certain things that you have to do right. If you get these things wrong, discus can be a challenging fish to keep. Number one, when buying discus, buy discus from a good source. Don't buy discus from, let's say if you go to a fish store and you find a very dirty tank and some of the fish are hiding and they look sick, they're getting dark and they're thin. Don't get those fish. You might try to save some money on buying cheaper discus, but you're going to spend a lot more later on. This is the mistake I did. When I started discus, whatever I was reading about them online was they're very hard to keep, they're very sensitive fish. So I thought it's better I get something very cheap, so it's easier for me to handle the loss if they do end up dying. And I got around 8 discus from a very bad source actually. And I ended up in so many problems right away. And anyways, it doesn't matter which fish you're buying. Even with other fish, you should try to buy them from a good source, because if you get one sick fish, it can cause a disease in your entire tank. And this is what happened with me. I got discus from a bad source, and I thought that, okay, once it gets clean water and clean environment, it will just bounce back to health. And this has happened to me with many other fish before. That I get the fish even from a not a very good source, but once you give them clean water and nice food and good environment, they just bounce back to health and nice colors and they live long. But in this time I forgot that it's not just about giving the discus to bounce back to health. It's also about considering a risk that these fish might bring something very nasty to my tank and might cause disease to the entire stock that I currently have. And this is what happened with me. I brought discus that were infected with parasites and flukes, I think, and they just caused a breakout of problems in my tank, and everything in my tank was sick. And I spent so long treating my entire tank. I spent so much money on medication, and the frustration was there. I lost some fish. So please, when you're getting discus, get it from a good source. Get healthy looking discus. Even if you have to spend a little more, it's worth spending a little more when you're buying discus, because this will help you in being successful with them. If you're going to get sick discus, you're already starting at the very wrong point. Number two, when you're buying discus, don't buy 1 or 2 discus. Buy them in a group of 6 or 7. Discus are cichlids, which mean they're aggressive fish. But the good thing about discus is they're not aggressive to almost any other kind of species, but they're aggressive towards one another. So when you get 1 or 2 discus, or let's say 3 discus, what's going to happen is that the dominant fish will start bullying the weaker fish. If you have 3, 2 of them will gang up together and they will start bullying the third one. If you get 4, maybe 3 of them will gang up together and start bullying the fourth one. So the more you get, the better it is, because in that way the aggression is really diffused among them and they cannot just target one specific fish and all of them pulling that particular fish. So when you're getting discus, buy them in groups like 6 or 7 or more, and try to buy them of a similar size. If you're getting bigger and smaller discus, there are chances that the smaller fish are the ones that are going to suffer, and you might end up losing some. Number 3, keep them in a bigger tank. Discus are fish that are eventually going to grow big if you're getting them small, and if you're getting them big anyways, then anyways you need a bigger tank. So if you imagine if you're getting 6, 7 or 8 discus and they're going to grow really big if you take really good care of them, then you need at least in my opinion, I think a good size tank is to start with 70 or 75 gallon tank, because for adult fish you can consider for adult discus, I think the ideal ratio is to have 10 gallons of water for each fish, but you can slightly overstock it if you're good with your cleaning maintenance habits of the tank. For example, in my tank I'm keeping I think 11. It's 75 gallon tank, but I personally feel it's slightly overstocked and I want to reduce some. I think 7 or 8 or maybe 9 is a good number in a 75 gallon tank. But especially when you're paying attention to your fish and the condition of your tank, and you're not just ignoring the maintenance. So please, when you provide them with the bigger tanks, if you're getting 6, 7, 8 discus, at least go for a 75 gallon tank. But if you're getting very small discus, you can start with a smaller tank like 50 gallon or something, and as they grow, eventually you can upgrade your tank. But it's always a good idea to get fish that are not very small, because based on my research, what I've read is that smaller fish are more prone to diseases, or they have weaker immune system. If you get discus from a good source and they're slightly bigger in size, I think at least if they are 3 inches or more, that's a good size to get a discus, because you have much more success with discus at those sizes. Smaller than that, I think it's slightly tricky. And also you need to consider that growing discus is different than keeping discus. I might do a separate video about this topic, that what's the difference and why you should be careful if you're getting smaller discus or bigger discus. And if you're getting smaller discus, are you ready to put up with the work that's required to grow them out? So that will be a separate video, that's a different topic. So for now, just remember, buy them in groups of 6 or 7 or more, and buy them of similar sizes. Number 4, keep discus with slow swimming fish. For example, if you're keeping discus with, let's say, torpedo barbs. Now, torpedo barbs are very fast fish. I love those fish. I have kept them before with discus, and I love the combination of discus and torpedo barbs. But whenever I was putting food for the discus are comparatively slow moving fish, and they're slow eaters. So I had to feed way too much food for the discus, because I know most of them was right away going to be eaten by torpedo barbs or any other fast moving fish. So you have to keep in mind that when you're going to feed discus takes time in consuming their food. So you have to keep in mind what other fish you're going to keep with them, so that they get to eat enough to stay healthy or to grow if you're trying to grow them. Number 5, it's their diet. Feed discus high quality food, food that is full of nutrients, because if you see a healthy discus from the front, you will see they're very thick. And the ones that are not fed enough, or the ones that are suffering with problems, they'll be very, very thin. So these fish, in my opinion, require lots of protein in their diet. I feed my fish mostly beef hard, and I've noticed that they do a lot well on beef hard when it comes to gaining size and staying really thick. So diet is an essential part, but also it's you have to give them variety of food, because these fish are picky eaters, and sometimes if they get used to one kind of food, they will refuse to eat any other kind of food. So sometimes that can cause issues. And here it is. Here is my cat ruining my video. So take care of their diet. Try to give them a variety of foods. Give them pellets. You can give them beef hard. You can give them black worms. You can give them brine shrimps. A lot of people feed bloodworms. Based on my research, I noticed one very reputed breeder, they mentioned that a lot of problems are associated with feeding bloodworms in the long term to discus. So for that reason, I never fed bloodworms to my fish. But I think occasionally it can be fed, but try to avoid feeding bloodworms on regular basis. So there are many, just give them a variety of food, and give them high quality food, and feed them at least twice a day if they're adult discus. I sometimes feed once a day, but I feed them enough. But I think twice a day is a good number for adult discus. For juvenile discus, or if you're trying to grow discus, that's a different story that I will try to cover in a different video. Provide discus with warm water. I think an ideal temperature range for discus is 28 to 30 degrees centigrade, but you can even keep them higher at 31, 32 degrees centigrade. Especially when you're trying to grow discus out, they're usually kept at warmer temperature. I personally have not kept discus at 27 and lower temperature for a very long time. Now, different people might have different experiences. Maybe some people have success keeping them in slightly cooler water. In my personal experience, I keep mine around 28 to 30 degrees, and they do absolutely fine. So, and in general, they're believed to do very well in warmer waters. So try to keep them warm. Ideal range is 28 degrees to 30 degrees centigrade. And the next tip, it's no-brainer that you need to do your water changes on time. Now, how many water changes you have to do, how often you have to do it, really depends on how many fish you have, and what size of tank you have, and what you're feeding to the fish. Now, a lot of people when you search on the internet, they will say we do 90% water every day, we do 50% water every day, we do 50% twice a day. I don't follow these regimes for maintenance. I do one water once a week, and sometimes I do 50, sometimes I do 60, 70, sometimes I try to do 80% once a week. Now it really depends that how many fish you're keeping and how much food you're feeding them and what kind of food you're feeding them. For example, if you're feeding them beef heart especially, and you will notice when discus try to eat this kind of food, the food, it disintegrates into water and it really ruins the water quality. So if you're feeding beef heart and you're feeding a lot of beef heart quite often, and you have way too many fish in a 50-gallon tank, or let's say 70-gallon tank, you're keeping way too many fish. Maybe you will need to do water changes twice a week. Now, that really depends on how many fish you're keeping and what kind of food you're feeding and what are your nitrates level and stuff like that. So if you understand these basics, if you understand the basics of water changes and all, I think you understand that how important these things are. Just stick to your maintenance. Don't be lazy with your water changes. I'm not telling you do 50%, 60% water change every single day, no. But you need to know what's the ratio of the water and the fish you're keeping and the food you're feeding them. And based on that, stick to your maintenance schedule. And in the end, just stick to the fundamentals, the basic principle. What's wrong with you? So just stick to the fundamentals. You can keep any kind of fish successfully as long as you're doing the basics right. In the end, I just like to point out one thing, that even though I said that discus are not really that hard to keep, they're not really that sensitive to keep even. But there's one thing I want to point out, that I still do not recommend discus to beginners. And the reason for that is, number one, it's different to learn things from the internet or in a book, in theory, but it's different when you implement them. So for beginners, usually they're still struggling to understand and have a hold of the idea of basic fundamentals of keeping aquarium. For example, what's nitrogen cycle, the balance of the chemicals in it, what's right kind of filtration, the flow, the compatibility between the fish temperament, and also they're not very good at picking up signs that which fish is a healthy fish and which is not a healthy fish, which fish is already showing signs of illness, which fish is showing signs of aggression. So because as a beginner, these things you learn with time, and you're not really good at it. So for those reasons, I do not recommend discus for beginners who have not kept other kinds of fish before. But if you're someone who have been keeping fish for quite some time and you have been keeping them successfully without any major issues, your fish are not dying every now and then, and you know what you're doing, understand the basics. For you guys, discus are not really that hard to keep. People get scared most of the time because when you get new discus, there are certain things that really shocks them, which they're not ready for. And for that you can refer to my video. I'll try to leave the link for that in the description below, in which I mention new discus problems, that when you get a new discus, what are the things you can expect, what problems you will most likely face. So those are the things that sometimes scare even some experienced fish keepers, because discus are slightly different than other fish in their behavior and everything. But once you're past that, they're not that hard. Stick to the fundamentals, and they're really good to keep. They're beautiful, and I think anyone who knows how to keep fish should not miss the chance of keeping these beauties. I waited a very long time before I tried discus, and once I did, I kept telling myself, oh my god, why I did not try to keep them before. They are amazing, they're beautiful. So that's it. I think this video should be helpful for all of you guys. So please give this video a like if you like the video. If it helped you learn something new, please let me know in the comment section. If you have any suggestions, let me know. And please do consider subscribing to the channel, and enjoy this hobby and keep learning. And I'll see you next time. Until then, peace.